Welcome to the podcast summary of Joseph's tomb. Joseph's tomb looks, at first glance, like a very small shrine on the edge of Nablus. But around that one room and its cenotaph, you get biblical memory, rival religious traditions, archaeology that doesn't settle much, and a very modern struggle over land, legitimacy, and who gets to pray. It's one of those places where the question isn't only what happened there, it's also who gets to say what happened there, and which version of the past becomes real on the ground. The shrine stands in Balata village at the eastern entrance to Nablus, near Jacob's, between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, and close to Tel Balata, the site identified with ancient Shechem. That geography gives it a lot of biblical charge. Shechem matters in the Hebrew Bible, so a tomb placed here immediately picks up that resonance. The present building itself is much less dramatic than the arguments around it. It's basically a rectangular room with a cenotaph rebuilt in 1868. Archaeologists have not found architectural elements in the structure older than that rebuilding, and they have not established that the cenotaph contains Joseph's remains. So the building is famous, but the physical evidence is pretty modest. Biblically, the connection comes from a chain of references rather than a map pin. Genesis says Joseph's brothers swore to carry his bones out of Egypt. Exodus says Moses took them during the departure, and Joshua says they were buried at Shechem in land Jacob had bought. What's missing is the exact spot. Joshua gives the destination, not the street address. That gap matters because later Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions attach Joseph's burial to several different places, including Nablus, Hebron, Seft, and a site near Beit Ajeh. This site has been venerated by Samaritans, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and each tradition brought a different emphasis. For Samaritans, it has been especially important, traditionally their second holiest site. Some Muslims link the shrine instead to a local Sufi figure, Sheikh Yusuf al-Dawik or Dawikat, who died in the 18th century. And those aren't just old theological footnotes. The building has served, at different times, as a Muslim shrine, a Jewish prayer room, a yeshiva, and a guarded religious compound, depending on who controlled the area. Modern scholarship generally can't verify the Joseph story as straight history. That includes Joseph's Egyptian career, the transfer of his bones in the Exodus, and the burial itself. Some scholars, like Kenneth Kitchen and James Hoffmeyer, defend parts of the biblical picture. Others, like Donald Redford, argue the Joseph story has no basis in fact. A lot of contemporary scholars read Joseph as a literary figure, maybe even a personification of a tribe, and classify the story as a romance, novella, or wisdom-shaped narrative that took form sometime between the 8th and 5th centuries BCE. There are also comparative theories linking the movement of Joseph's bones to motifs from Osiris, or comparing burial traditions at Shechem with Dionysus at Delphi. In those readings, the tomb tradition reflects Israel reworking an older sacred site. The earliest post-biblical references to a Joseph tomb in the Shechem area show up in the 4th century CE. The Bordeaux itinerary in 333 mentions it, and Eusebius says the tomb was pointed out near the suburb of Neapolis. The late appearance of those references has led some scholars to think the site may originally have been more strongly Samaritan than Jewish or Christian. Samaritan traditions even describe Byzantine-era fights with Christians over access, along with alleged attempts to dig up Joseph's bones. Christian and Samaritan stories then split sharply. One Christian account says officials found a marble sarcophagus near Shechem and sent the relics to Byzantium for Hagia Sophia. Samaritan tradition says divine fire stopped the excavation. Same bones, very different ownership claims. Medieval travelers were not consistent about where Joseph's tomb actually was. Some put it near Balata, a spring, and a tree. Others tied Joseph to Jacob's well, Mount Gerizim, Nablus, Shiloh, Hebron, or somewhere else entirely. One scholar, Hans Martin Schenke, argued that the tomb may originally have been associated with Jacob's well and later shifted. The broader point is that different communities kept attaching Joseph's name to different sacred places. By the 19th century, travelers described a modest Muslim-style shrine, not some obviously ancient patriarchal monument. One called it the reputed tomb. another a plain, roofless Santon's tomb. At the same time, Jewish and Samaritan visitors were maintaining the place and leaving inscriptions. There was a Hebrew rebuilding inscription from 1749, and surveyor Claude Condor noted Hebrew and Samaritan inscriptions, lamps, incense, and offerings. Condor also measured the place in detail and noted an English inscription saying it had been rebuilt by early 1868 at the expense of the English consul at Damascus. He even observed that the tomb's orientation didn't fit the expected layout of Muslim graves, though that didn't seem to reduce Muslim devotion. Sacred geography has a way of ignoring neat categories. Before 1967, local Palestinians reportedly treated the building as the shrine of Sheikh Yusuf, a healer associated with Quranic recitation. Couples prayed there for children, and boys were brought there for first haircuts. After Israel captured Nablus in 1967, Jewish settlers increasingly visited, and by 1975 Muslims were barred from worshiping there. In the 1980s, the Od Yosef Chai Yeshiva was established beside an IDF outpost, turning the shrine into a religious and political foothold. That transformation accelerated in the 1990s. Israeli officials and settler leaders publicly argued over whether the place was an ancient Jewish shrine or a relatively recent Muslim one. In 1997, Torah scrolls were brought in, the prayer niche toward Mecca was covered, and the compound was declared a synagogue and yeshiva. At one point, the IDF imposed a 24-hour curfew on Nablus, so settlers and 2 Likud members of Knesset could pray there. That's a pretty blunt illustration of how sacred access and state power got fused. Under Oslo, Nablus came under Palestinian Authority jurisdiction in 1995, but Israel retained control of Joseph's tomb and kept soldiers there. The arrangement promised religious rights in theory, while in practice allowing Jewish access and barring Muslims. The site turned into a recurrent flashpoint. In 1996, during clashes after the Hasmonean Tunnel opening in Jerusalem, 6 Israeli soldiers were killed at the tomb. At the start of the Al-Aqsa Intifada in 2000, Israel evacuated the compound and handed it to Palestinian police. Protesters then looted and burned parts of it, including the yeshiva and religious books, and the dome was painted green before later being repainted white. After Israel reoccupied Nablus in 2002, Jewish worshippers returned through clandestine visits and then guarded monthly midnight pilgrimages. The site was refurbished around 2009 and 2010, and senior Israeli rabbis visited with hundreds of worshippers. But the pattern of violence kept returning. In 2011, Palestinian Authority police fired on cars carrying Israeli worshippers, killing Ben Joseph Livnat. There were further arson and vandalism attacks in 2014, 2015, and 2022, along with shootings tied to attempted visits. Joseph's tomb ends up feeling like a miniature version of the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The dispute is archaeological, religious, territorial, and administrative all at once. People are not just arguing over access to one shrine, they're arguing over which history makes the shrine sacred in the first place. And the lack of conclusive proof hasn't made the place less important. If anything, the uncertainty leaves more room for symbolism, whether that's ancestral return, Samaritan continuity, Muslim local sanctity, or a claim to sovereignty. So that's Joseph's tomb, a tiny structure with a very large afterlife. It's a reminder that in this region, even a single room can hold centuries of faith, argument, and unfinished history. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.